Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of Detroit Lions Review and Preview. We are coming into the final week of the season and what is going to be the biggest game of the year of the regular season because it has come down to a winner-take-all game versus the Vikings. The Vikings have been the biggest nemesis in my entire life for the Lions. It's between them and Green Bay, but given when I was a kid and it was Minnesota who completely dominated the division back in the 70s, and we're leaving Lions, Bears, and Packers all in their dust. I think I give them a slight edge over biggest nemesis. However, Green Bay's pretty darn close, certainly in the last, 20, 25 years. So I guess I go back and forth on that. Anyway, let's talk about the Lions season and the final game against San Francisco. So why was this game significant? The Lions finished the season 8-0 on the road. Now, the Lions have only had one undefeated season, either home or away. That was back in 91. They finished 8-0 at the Silverdome, and they only did that once. They came 7-1 a few times, 6-2 a number of times, but only once did they ever go 8-0, and that was back in 1991. That same year, they were 500 on the road, 4-4, and in fact, 2-4 outdoors. Now, why do I bring that up? It's interesting when you look at the Lions' history. When they moved into the Silverdome, they were an atrocious road team. And pretty much throughout my entire life, the Lions were a terrible road team. To give you an idea, so they moved into the Silverdome in 1975. Now, that year, they didn't do that badly on the road. They were 3-4, finished the year 7-3. But then the next 3 years, they went 1-6 on the road, 1-6 on the road in 77, 2-6 on the road in 78. Now, all those years they finished either 500 or one game below they finished 6-8 in 76 and 77, and 78 they finished 7-9. So they'd always finish one game below 500 and always do decently well at home, but they couldn't win on the road. And then in 79 they went on to go 0-8 on the road. So that was the first time they went winless on the road, at least in the Super Bowl era. And it wasn't until 1993, so if you add that up, that's 18 years it took them to even have a winning record on the road. That was back in 1993. We are going to talk about that season today shortly. But in total, this team, by my count, and I might be forgetting something, 6 times they went 0-8 on the road. So they have been an atrocious road team. Between 2001 and 2003, of course, the Millen era, they went 0-8 on the road 3 consecutive years, and then they did the same thing in 2008 and 2009. So 6 times, by my count, they've gone 0-8 on the road. So it was really a huge accomplishment for them to win every single game on the road. It's not easy to win on the road in the NFL. Usually, if you're a gambler and you're like down to that, well, which team should I go with? And teams are even. You usually pick home field as kind of the tiebreaker and what's the correct way to go. So what can I say? I no matter what else happens this year, 8-0 on the road, that's a huge accomplishment. And I give them all a bunch of credit. And the other people that deserve a lot of credit, of course, is the team, but the fans. Very interesting how cool it is to be a Lions fan now. I remember growing up, and when I was a teen, I was a very big fan of Billy Sims, Barry Sanders. It was not cool to be a Lions fan. In fact, if I told people from Detroit I was a Lions fan, I was like, why? What would you be a Lions fan for? These are people from Detroit. Weren't impressed that somebody from Canada was actually rooting for their team, but I was, and in fact, I got made fun of. Now the Lions are like a hot item, and in some ways, maybe the most popular team in the league. No one even knew how bad the Lions were until the last couple of years. I mean, I tell people, oh, the Lions have never been in a Super Bowl. What do you mean the Lions have never been in a Super Bowl? No, never been in a Super Bowl. Now people know that, and it's part of the reason it's become kind of the team that America is rooting for, because people want to see, people like to cheer for the underdog, but it just took so long for them to rise as that underdog. So it was a big win for the Lions. It was the first time they won in San Francisco since 1975. I talked about that game on the last show that I did. That was led by Joe Reed. But this game was all offense, thanks to the offense. All offense from Kirby Joseph. So Jared Goff, another fantastic day. Jameson Williams had a great day. Amon St. Brown, great day. Jahmyr Gibbs, great day. Just a fantastic day all around by the offense. But the 49ers were a dead man walking team, but nevertheless, they gave the Lions everything they could handle on their defense, and luckily Kirby Joseph saved them with those 2 interceptions in the second half, and that really was the difference in the game. Because if he hadn't gotten those 2 interceptions, I don't think they could have won because they had fallen behind, and they had to get possessions back somehow. But if you look at their last 2 weeks when they were playing dead man walking teams, they had 2 interceptions last week, and the week before they had 2 fumble recoveries. But one thing they are not doing at all is making the other team punt. So, that's going to be a big problem this week. I'm going to talk about why, and we'll talk about that Vikings game. So, great year on the road, 8-0, beat San Francisco for the first time since 1975. And they didn't have any more injuries, which they certainly couldn't afford any given the big game they have this week. Okay, let's talk about Lions winner-take-all games in their history. Some of these games I have talked about on my show, but I'm going to bring up some of them again. So, in total, the Lions have faced 4 final games where it was winner-take-all for the division. They are 1-3 in these 4 games, so we will go through each of these briefly. The first one was in 1981 when it was the NFC Central. It was against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Lions lost that game 20-17. I think I did talk about that in the game this year when they played against Tampa Bay, but essentially the big difference in that game was that the Buccaneers did not have any turnovers at all, and Eric Hipple had 2 interceptions, and he had a fumble recovery, which was returned for a touchdown. That was the big play of the game, actually. That one turned it around. The final score was 20-17, but if you actually remember the game, it actually was not really that close. The Buccaneers had a 20-10 lead pretty late. Lions did have a chance to get an onside kick, which they actually came closer than I've actually re-looked at that game a few times. There were two really key plays, or three key plays really in that game, as far as I was concerned. So the first one was, as I mentioned, in the second half, already losing 13-10, Eric Hipple got sacked by the great Leroy Selman, and Dave Logan picked up the ball, returned the fumble for a touchdown, and they were then leading 20-10, and essentially the Buccaneers never looked back from there. But I always thought another critical part of that game is the Lions actually did have a 7-3 lead. They were driving for at least another score, and when they were on about the 20-yard line or so, Eric Hipple threw a really bad pass that got intercepted, and on the very, very next play, Doug Williams completed an 85-yard touchdown to Kevin House. I always said that those 2 back-to-back plays, the interception and the long touchdown, was like the Lions never really recovered from that. Because at the point when they were ahead 7-3 and driving for a touchdown, it was like they had taken control of the game. And that was, and that's what happens in football games, is that there's these key points in the game where you just kind of lose control. And that's really where the Lions lost control in that one. They just never were able to regain control of that game, and the Buccaneers were just, it was almost like they had a strategy. Hey, we don't think this guy Hipple can beat us, and we're just going to wait for him to make mistakes, and he did in the way of 3 turnovers. And as far as the one thing I've always wondered about that game, because it was the first time in my life that the Lions had a legitimate chance to win the division, is what if they had started Gary Danielson? He was the more experienced QB. He had started and beaten Tampa Bay a few times over the years. But anyway, what ifs and all that is just a little bit of a conversation. The second time, the Lions actually were successful, but it was a good news, bad news thing. So that was in 1993, final game of the season, no Barry Sanders. And I talked about this game in my show this year too. They beat Green Bay 30-20 and won the right to play Green Bay the very next week in Detroit again at the Silverdome, where they then lost on the infamous Brett Favre to Sterling Sharp touchdown with about 40 seconds to play. So they did win that one. So they won the division, but then Green Bay, in a sense, won the war, as it were, because they were the ones who went further in the playoffs. And Green Bay eventually, led by Brett Favre, would eventually win a Super Bowl and appear in another one. So that was the NFC Central. Then when it became the NFC North, they had 2 other chances to win last week of the season, both times against Green Bay, both losses. 2014, that one was in Green Bay. They lost 30-20. That game was tied 14 going in about mid third quarter, and then the Packers took over the game. They scored the next 16. Aaron Rodgers definitely outplayed Matthew Stafford that day. His quarterback rating was 139.6 versus Stafford's 89.2. For those of you who remember the game, it was kind of notorious for Ndamukong Suh stomping on Aaron Rodgers' calf and him claiming that he didn't even know that his leg was there. I think any of us really bought that. And then just a few years later, in 2017, the Lions would have yet another chance to beat Green Bay for the NFC North. This one would be in Ford Field. But in the last few weeks, Matthew Stafford was playing with a broken finger. So the Lions did hold a 14-10 lead at the end of the first half of that game. But Stafford really was having a lot of trouble playing, although his stats actually for that game were actually pretty good. But when all was said and done, they lost 31-24. Green Bay basically dominated the second half. There was a touchdown with about 13 seconds left by the Lions, so really there was a garbage time touchdown. And so all in all, the Lions are 1-3. All right, let's talk about this week's game. So the Lions are going to have a very hard time this week. So I know they've won the last 2 weeks, but they're playing dead man walking team. So I look at the last game, and the Lions, I would say they just won the game, and I would say it was a fair assessment that the Lions just outplayed the Vikings enough to win that game. I do think the score, which was pretty close, was indicative that, yes, the Lions played a little bit better, and they won by a little bit. As if people remember the game, Minnesota came out and kind of dominated early, and then Detroit kind of took over the game. But then Minnesota, because they have a great defense, which is going to be a big problem this week, or they certainly have an opportunistic defense, they scored a touchdown late, which put them ahead, but then the Lions were able to then get a game-winning field goal. So one of the big problems the Lions has, they cannot force a team to punt right now. And that's last week, I don't think they forced San Francisco to punt all game. They were helped by missed field goals and some missed extra points. Lions had some missed extra points themselves, but and that's why I would say the over/under on how many times the opposition team, being Minnesota, is going to have to punt, and they say this is going to be a problem throughout the playoffs, is probably 1.5. So if you're a gambler, what I'm saying is if you bet the over, then you're betting that they're going to force the other team to bet 2 times. And I would bet the under. I'd say if they can get them to punt once, we're going to be lucky. So here's what I will say. If the Lions are going to win this game, then just as they've done the last 2 weeks, they are going to have to win the turnover battle by 2. So what I'm counting on for a potential win is the Lions to be +2 in turnovers. And their defense isn't that great, so I'm actually looking for more unforced errors things. Maybe, we hope maybe Sam Darnold for a throw or 2 can go into the Sam Darnold that was a bust of a number 1 draft pick, and not the player he's been this year. When all of a sudden he's Jim Plunkett leading the Raiders, and I'm going way back in the 1980s. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Jim Plunkett was kind of a failed number 1 pick. He'd been bouncing around the league, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, back in 1980, he led the Raiders, who picked him off the scrap heap, and he led them to a Super Bowl. And a couple of years later, he led them to a second Super Bowl. So I am actually right now, I'm kind of comparing Sam Darnold to Jim Plunkett. I think that I haven't heard that comparison by anybody, but that could be where we're going with this. Nevertheless, what I'm hoping is that he, just as Purdy did last year's throw, makes a bad throw or 2, or maybe there's a failed exchange or a fumbled snap or something, but the Lions somehow are going to have to make some turnovers, because the whole concept is, well, they're going to score every time they get the ball. That's not going to happen. I promise you, that will not happen, because the Vikings defense is actually pretty good. So, you look at the Vikings defense. They've got Andrew Van Ginkel, 11.5 sacks and 2 interceptions. So, they've got a pretty dominant defensive player. And then total, they have 47 sacks, 22 interceptions, 9 fumble recoveries, versus the Lions, 35 sacks, 16 interceptions, 8 fumble recoveries. So the Lions, that's the problem. The Vikings offense is pretty much just as good as the Lions. I mean, they've got, Yeah, Lions have St. Brown, Williams, Laporta, and Gibbs, but Vikings counter that. They've got Aaron Jones at running back. No, I like Gibbs a little better, but just a bit. But as I'm a huge St. Brown fan, but he ain't better than Justin Jefferson, that's for sure. Hawkinson and Laporte, I say, is pretty much a wash, and then you've got Addison. So um, offensively, it's pretty much a wash. Again, I probably like Goff better than I do Darnold, but I like the Vikings defense so much better than the Lions. They've also got Jonathan Grenard. He had 11 sacks. I mean, the Lions, they have two guys in double-digit sacks, Van Ginkel and Grenard, and the Lions sack leader is 7.5 sacks. And oh, by the way, he's been on injured reserve since that's Hutchinson. He's been on injured reserve since week 5, I think, or whenever the Cowboys game was, which is most unfortunate because the guy was playing out of his mind. But that's the way it is. And by the way, Grenard also has four forced fumbles. They've also got Byron Murphy with 6 interceptions. They've also got a pretty good safety in Harrison Smith. They've got another guy at linebacker, Pat Jones. He's got 7 sacks. Again, Lions don't have anybody who's currently active that has 5 sacks. I think the leader right now is Darius Smith with 3 sacks. And I mean, you've got a bunch of guys with 1.5. They're just not making the big plays. So, like I said, they are going to, if they're going to somehow do this, they're going to need the +2 on turnovers. So, what am I predicting? I can't look at that and honestly sit here and tell you the Lions are going to win this weekend. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I don't think they're going to win. And I'll tell you the truth, even with the crowd and everything else, I just don't think it's going to be that close. Unfortunately, because of the injuries to McNeil, to Hutchinson, to Davis, Anzalone might be back, but he'll be coming right off back his broken arm. I find sometimes when guys come back from those things, it's like they push it. Next thing you know, they're injured again. So even if he comes back, I'm not counting on him to be the same Anzalone that left the field a few weeks ago against the Bears. So the Lions have a chance, and that's going to be the formula. It's going to take a couple of turnovers and at least one stop somewhere. So we'll see. I certainly hope they win. I hope that next week I'm hoping next week I get to take a week off. I hope I'm wrong. I can take the bye week with the Lions and then go talk about the playoff game. But if not, I'll be talking about a road playoff game. Now, depending on how many injuries happen there, I'm more optimistic about them maybe potentially beating a Tampa Bay or a Rams team because I think the Vikings are better than either of those teams. And we're going to see. So go Lions. Let's hope once again, like I said a few weeks ago with the Bears, although Bears I might have been jumping the gun saying they were going to lose the Bears. I think I underestimated how bad they were. But the Vikings are clearly not bad. They've won 14 games. People like to minimize that. But they've won 14 games just as the Lions have, and they are healthier. So I'd like to sit here and say, hey, rah, rah, rah. They're going to win and they're going to overcome it all. But I will say this, if they win this week and Dan Campbell doesn't win Coach of the Year, that's atrocious because to be able to win this big game and be down this many players and all your best defensive players, he absolutely deserves Coach of the Year. As a matter of fact, the whole coaching staff and the whole coaching staff deserves the assistant coaches of the year too. Ben Johnson's done a great job, but he hasn't had the problems there, and Glenn has had to deal with. So we'll see what happens, and good luck, go Lions, and let's hope I'm wrong. Thank you for watching. Hit like, hit subscribe.